It's time for this week's episode of Brandon Sports Talk, featuring in-depth interviews from those who are trending in the world of athletics. And now, here's the host of Brandon Sports Talk, Brandon Pate.
Welcome back to Brandon Sports Talk. In today's episode, I have the privilege to interview Queen's University head triathlon coach Sonni Dyer. How are you doing today?
Doing great. How are you, Brandon?
I'm doing good. Can you talk about your coaching experience and how you got started?
Sure. I started life, as a middle school, high school, and then college runner. And like a lot of triathletes who come from a running background, just injuries forced me into an alternative sport. And for me, that was cycling. So I raced as a professional cyclist for a number of years. I spent some time racing in Europe. And came back to the United States and decided to give this triathlon thing a go. Started off really in duathlon around the early 90s and that kind of thing. And then eventually and over time, got to the point where my swim was competitive enough to be able to do triathlons and things like that. And then so between 99 and 2003, I raced professionally in triathlon. Also started coaching around 96 or so. And in 99 became a full-time coach, started a company called trymycoach.com. So I've been a full-time coach now for 22 years since the end of 1999. In 2006, rebranded as Studio 7 Multisport. Coached full-time, had an actual physical studio, training studio, for a number of those years. And then in 2014 was approached by Queen's University of Charlotte about starting a triathlon, a varsity level triathlon program here at Queen's. And it's been a ride ever since.
Can you talk about, of course, your coaching time for the US Junior Nationals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've coached along the way. A lot of my clients were youth, junior, and developmental U23 cyclists because I had a background in that. He raced in Europe and that. My son grew up as a cyclist, so he raced on the US National Mountain Bike team in Europe, and then on what's called Euro Cross Camp, which is USA Cycling's cyclocross camp, which is an immersion-based program in Belgium. And then also had coached several other juniors, two sisters in particular, Hannah and Allison Arnsman. And I think between them, they've won something like 17 national championships. And they were just, they were athletes who happened to live in the same town, who had some talent and a whole lot of work ethic. So, my time in coaching them was, a lot of podiums. And they've connected me, of course, to a lot of kids, who got the sport of cycling and then also triathlon too. So I coach kind of cyclists and triathletes and even some high school runners along the way as well.
How did you know you wanted to start your business of the studio?
It was interesting as at the time, I was a mail order manager for Inside Out Sports in Raleigh-Cary area. And I was racing professionally myself. And so many people at that time in the 90s were coming up to me and talking about, coaching and things like that. And would I coach them? So it just got to be the point where it grew and grew. And now my full-time clientele just meant that this was going to be my full-time job, So, and then through that as well, part of that was, when we moved to the western part of the state, we were doing camps, clinics. I was doing so many one-on-one sessions with whether it was a bike fit or some kind of nutritional analysis or a run gait assessment or swim stroke assessments that it just made sense to actually have a brick and mortar location for a lot of people to come in, meet with me, talk about their training, do some assessment testing and kind of move them forward in sport. Because that's a great thing about triathlon. It is a lifetime sport. It's kind of like golf and tennis. I mean, you can play. My oldest client athlete right now is well into his 70s. So, and he still races. So he's my hero.
In 2019, I saw that you won the USAT College Collegiate Club. Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah, I mean, that was a big milestone for us because in beginning the program, our first year competitively was 2015. So our NCAA women's squad won the national championship, which in as terms of women's triathlon, it is an emerging sport. To get to a championship sport status, like all the other sports, NCAA sports we see, you need 40 institutions that sign on for sports sponsorship to do that. USA Triathlon is currently at 36 institutions, so they're only 4 away from moving from an emerging sport to a championship sport. So in this process from 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, we had won 5 NCAA national championships on the women's side as an emerging sport. But one thing that had constantly eluded us is our men's program, because in our first year at collegiate club nationals, we had finished 7th. And then I think after that it was 4th. And then the next year, I think it was 5th. And then I think the next year we went back to 4th. So we had finally by 2019 put together the squad that we could, compete for a national championship. And it was kind of one of those days where everything clicked for us. And the men, we put 4 or 5 men in the top 20 in that race. And that race had over 1,200, or total has at collegiate nationals, men and women, has anywhere between 1,200 and 1,400 athletes racing in that race. So in the men's field, you got about 600, 700 men in that field. And to put 5 guys in the top 20, and honestly, one of the smallest schools in the race, because at collegiate club nationals, D1 size schools, D2 size schools, and D3 size schools all race together. So for us as a school of 2,000 to beat Cal, Colorado, US Naval Academy, Colorado State, Texas A&M, I mean, a lot of the big time schools, it was a big deal for us. So that was our first men's title, and we're the first D2 size school to ever win a collegiate club national championship as a result.
That's so amazing. Can you talk, of course, about the culture that you have built for the triathlon program?
Yeah, I like to call it a culture of we. And part of that just came out of the necessity of the sport of triathlon. By the time a kid, if you're a basketball player, or a soccer player, or a football player, or a baseball player, you grow up as a kid playing on teams, right? As a triathlete, you don't grow up playing on teams. You grow up as an individual playing the sport together. And then all of a sudden, they get to college, and now they've got to know how to interact and work together and sacrifice together as a team. So a lot of times it's a bit of a paradigm shift. And then you add to the fact that half of our team is international, and we have 17 different countries represented on our squad, men's and women's. You get people from 17 different countries coming in who've never operated together in a team atmosphere. I mean, it's a big challenge. So, I tell people at the beginning of the year, our team is going to go through 3 phases. The first phase is always going to be that, as naturally as it happens, because you've come from an individual sport background and you've got young kids who are hungry to show a coach and each other what they can do. They're pretty much racing against one another in practice each day. So we go from the against phase to the with. And sometimes the with is the messy part, because sometimes that resembles collaboration. And sometimes when you put, 30, 40 people on a team, it's toleration, right? Because, in 3 different disciplines, you may have your strong swimmers, then you may have a separate group that is your strong cyclist, you may have a separate group that is your strong runners. But ultimately, when we go to against to with, our ultimate goal is to get to 4. And when we get to 4, we're, pretty much people are racing for one another. They're training each day for one another. They're acting even outside of practices in such a way that they're looking out for one another. So that's an important part of our culture, is to take care of one another, and I tell them as a coach, I'm going to make mistakes as well, but I have some great captains who kind of carry on that 4 culture.
With triathlon being a running, swimming, and cycling sport, how is it hard to, can you talk about the differences in between each, criterias, and does one particular player do all of the running, swimming, and diving?
So yeah, in triathlon, all athletes swim, all athletes bike, and all athletes run. And we race pretty much two different distances: a sprint distance, which is a half-mile swim, 20K, which is a 12.2-mile bike, and then a 5K run is the sprint distance. And then at some of the collegiate, that's also the NCAA distance. And in the NCAA racing, it is draft legal. So you're allowed to draft together on a bike, like drafting in NASCAR would be. And then at the collegiate club level, the championship races are Olympic distance, which is a 1,500 meter swim. So that's just 100 meters short of 1 mile in the water, open water all the time. 40K on the bike, which is 25 or so miles on the bike, and then a 10K run, which is 6.2 miles on the run. So that's a longer day, and it's all non-draft. So that's a much tougher, it can be a very tough race, and it takes a certain, athlete to be able to time trial like that for the better part of 2.5 hours, on the rivet the entire time. So of course you have some people that are swim specialists and run specialists, and some that are cycling specialists. So it takes all kinds. We have a saying that what we do is we train our limiters, but we race our strengths. So you always have the biggest opportunity to improve in the areas that you're not good. But then on race day, you want to, maximize where you are good,
What does a typical race day look like for Queen's University?
A lot of it depends on whether it's, kind of an away race or a home race. Triathlons are notorious for starting early in the morning, 9 times out of 10. So sometimes the start time will be 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9 a.m. or something like that. So we're usually staying overnight. If it's an early morning start, we will get to the course about 90 minutes beforehand. Very first thing that we do is we warm up. It's always important to warm up for these races. And we always warm up typically on the bike first, the run next, and then the swim last, because with the swim, you're right there before the swim. So you're checking out the course, getting warm and getting ready to swim. Another piece to what race day looks like is you got to set up a transition area. So there's an area that only athletes can go in. They've got to put their bike there. They've got to put it in the right gear. They got to make sure that they can have water and fuel on that bike. They've got to put their shoes and their helmet and everything else that they're going to need in the place so that their transition time between, we call it T1 and T2. T1 is transition 1, and that's where you go from the swim to the bike. T2 is where you go from the bike to the run. So you've got to have everything laid out so that you spend minimal time in transition. So they're setting all that up before the race. Then they're doing their warm-ups in the water as well. Last minute instructions. If it's a wetsuit race, they've got to take some time to be able to get that wetsuit on, preview some of the swim course, and then it's go time after that.
How has COVID impacted a course triathlon?
Yeah, so that's a great question, because we in March of 2019, the very first thing that it did was it completely halted the national championship pursuit to defend our national championship in 2020. So that race was canceled, and all students, left campus immediately. This past fall, we were virtual, so we were not on campus, so we couldn't have practice together and things like that. We only began back on campus training together here in January. So we've only been back, with one another now for the better part of about a month or so. So it's, it's basically put a 10 or 11 month pause on a lot of competitions and things like that. Moving forward, what it's going to do is it's going to change the format of races. So instead of there being a mass grouping of people that go off at one time, people will go off in 10-second increments in what we call a time trial type format. For race directors, it's made things hard because, no longer, do you have these gigantic pre-race meetings with a lot of people who are next to one another. Now you have to do a lot of that kind of thing virtually. You can't hand out water cups on a run course. You have to hand out water bottles. There's no award ceremonies oftentimes where a lot of people are allowed to group together. So there's some nuances that the sport has had to shift through, due to, mitigating some of the risk of grouping people together. Of course, at all races, everybody's wearing a mask while they warm up and that kind of thing until the race start, and then they can take those off. But, it's at least we get to train and race together. So we'll take it.
How important is it I know whenever you run, it's like a lot of breathing you have to do. So with you saying that you aren't able, like you can train with a mask, but whenever it comes to race time, is that a key factor to help you?
Well, so if you're operating at heart rate levels or intensity levels or paces that are fairly aerobic, low level, type stuff, wearing a mask isn't too difficult, especially on the run. Of course, we have to take the mask off to be able to swim and that kind of thing. Interestingly, on the bike, the mask, a lot of times, if you think about riding a bike, think about in a car, you have a windshield. On a bike, you have glasses. So wearing a mask on a bike a lot of times causes fogging on those glasses. So it's really not even safe to wear a mask sometimes when you're cycling, particularly if you live in a humid area, because it could fog your vision. And that's just like riding with a foggy windshield. You don't want to, driving, you don't want to do that, right? From a run standpoint, a lot of the sessions that we do, we get the heart rate up. So when the heart rate gets up, you don't want to hyperventilate. So that's a instance where, you want to take the mask off. For us, triathlon is, by the NCAA, is considered a low contact risk sport, unlike football and wrestling and rugby and all those sports, which are high contact risk. So it's, we can keep spaced apart, particularly in outdoor environments and things like that. So we're able to keep it pretty safe in the triathlon.
What does the recruitment process look like for prospective student athletes looking to get into triathlon?
Generally, a recruit will reach out to me, and then I'll send them some information and a little bit of the history of our program. We stress to all recruits that they should be making their decisions based off of the academics and the school first. Triathletes, our women's triathlon team has one of the highest GPA of all programs at Queens and has for 2 semesters now. So it's important to be a good student, and that's taken into consideration as well. But they'll reach out to me. I'll give them some information. They could decide to begin the admissions process with our admissions department. And then they may decide to take a visit. If they take a visit, we bring them in, and they're able to see what a day in the life at Queens University is like, from a training standpoint, from a class standpoint, from a campus standpoint, even from a team culture standpoint,
That's so amazing. What advice would you give upcoming high school athletes looking to get into college triathlon?
I would say, a lot of high schoolers come to us also from single sport disciplines. So they may be a swimmer who ran cross country, or a cross country runner who in the winter did swimming, or they may even be a triathlete. I would say, number one, try to get an idea as to what piques your interest, professionally. I'm not saying you need to choose a major when you're a junior or senior in high school. That's not necessarily. But you do want to get an idea of what your field of interest is, and then start narrowing down schools. And once you've narrowed that down to 4, 5, 6 schools or so, reach out to those coaches and begin that conversation process as to whether you're a good fit for their program and their team, whether your competitive level of performance in swimming, cycling, and running is very similar to what the other people on the team, so that you're going to be pushed. I tell kids all the time, the last thing you ever want to do is walk in on day one and be the best person on the team, because who's going to push you? You know what I mean? So I think that's a part of it. And then just go on some college visits and talk to some coaches, and then look at the results. Look at what those students are graduating in. Look at how many of them are getting their degree and moving forward with placement in the job market after that, and what that collegiate experience was like for them. you know.
That's wonderful. What advice would you give upcoming college coaches looking to get into coaching in triathlon?
I would say probably the biggest thing is don't concern. I mean, there are a lot of USA Triathlon level 1, level 2 coaches out there who coach private clients everywhere. And I'll tell you, collegiate coaching is much more challenging than private client coaching, because when you coach a private client, and let's say it's a junior or a youth, you know, they answer to their parents. When you coach an adult client, you know, they're coming to you because they're motivated and they want to get better themselves and that kind of thing, and they're mature. The collegiate, you know, we're straddling adolescence to adulthood, some very formative years here. So, you know, just understand that the athlete that you're working with is in a growth process, not just an athletic growth process, but a personal development, an academic, and even a professional growth process as well. So, you know, understand that that's going to be a big piece of coaching. It's a little bit like coaching, but it's a little bit like parenting, and it's a little bit like mentoring. You know what I mean? But I would say the biggest piece of advice that I'd give to someone looking to be a college coach is first volunteer with a college or a collegiate program somewhere. They need collegiate, you know, assistant coaches and volunteer coaches at almost everywhere. But just by volunteering, you'll get those daily reps of how these practices run and how to sequence a calendar and some of the challenges that come up. You know, and they may not even be swim, bike, run challenges. They might be roommate challenges, or they may be, you know, there's any number of things that can happen with this age group that we're working with here. So I'd say volunteer first and get your feet wet and start learning what your population is about, you know.
That's wonderful advice. Where can my listeners find you at on social media, along with the Queen's University Triathlon program?
I'm on Facebook at at Sonni Dyer, SonniDyer, and then Queen's University of Charlotte Triathlon also has a Facebook page as well. And they also have Queen's University of Charlotte Triathlon has an Instagram page as well. So yeah, any of those.
Thank you again, Coach Sonni, for your interview, and best of luck in this upcoming season.
Thanks a lot, Brandon. Go Royals.
You can find Brandon Sports Talk on Facebook at Brandon Sports Talk, Instagram at Brandon Sports Talk, Twitter at Talk_Brandon, and you can find me on YouTube at Brandon Sports Talk. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you again, Coach Sonni, for your interview, and best of luck.
Thank you, Brandon.
You've been watching Brandon Sports Talk. Please feel free to like, share, and subscribe to Brandon Sports Talk on social media and on YouTube.